Okay, greetings again, all. We are on to the presidency. I think I've got 41 slides here, but a lot of silly photos and such. So I'll try to be as quick as I can, although this is a pretty important topic, if you ask me, your friendly neighborhood political science professor. In the US political system, I don't think this came up earlier when we talked about, or I talked about, and we looked at some of the texts of the definitions of democracy. What does it mean to have a real democratic system? Well, one key indicator is a peaceful transition of power from one president to the next. And we've, in the United States, had a long history of doing this. And I'll give you a brief history that encompasses probably your entire lifetime. Clinton and Bush, we had Clinton leaving office and Bush coming in after a very controversial election in the year 2000. Obama won in 2008, not quite as much in doubt as Bush's victory in 2000, which was ultimately decided by the Supreme Court, but there was tension there, and Obama was graciously received by an outgoing President Bush. Trump, despite all of the treatment he received from citizen Trump, about his birth certificate and such, and then a pretty contentious campaign between Trump and Hillary Clinton, in which Clinton won the popular vote and Trump won the Electoral College, which is the only thing that matters. Obama received Trump, and then in the 2000 elections, we know that didn't go so well. Trump refused to meet with President-elect Biden after the election of November of 2000, and we know what happened in January of 2001. But anyway, here we are. Here's where we're at. We're talking about the presidency, a little bit of, like I said, recent historical overview. Let's get into the nitty gritty, and then the jokes will come later. But we know that Congress is spelled out in Article 1 of the Constitution, and thus we assume, and that's the longest article, we assume that the founders really thought of Congress as being the main institution in the political system in the United States. Hasn't really been the case. Article 2 begins by asserting that the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. Two important elements here. The question of what is executive power has remained a matter of dispute, and every person who's held the office of the presidency has sought to expand that. That's bipartisan. I'm not a fan of it, but everybody has done it. Power is vested in a president, and I put A in quotes there, thus establishing the unitary, in bold, nature of the office. This is very different from the executive in California, which we'll talk about at the end of my slides here. But this notion of the unitary executive will come up in the film Vice. So do pay attention to this and do contrast, say, what the George W. Bush administration, under the influence of Dick Cheney as vice president, how that administration thought of executive power, okay? Put that in your back pocket and come back to that in your papers should you do one. How do you become president? Of course, we know that the president's chosen by the Electoral College, which is in effect, as I say here, an indirect and undemocratic institution intended to provide a peer review for presidential selection in case, the people picked the wrong person. This was meant to give the powers that be a bit of oversight over how a president is selected. The first link here goes to Trevor Noah of The Daily Show talking about the Electoral College, and it's very silly. Around the time of the 2016 election. The second one, where say, here's a more serious take, is an NPR story from 2021 that is maybe not nearly as entertaining, but much more informative than the first link. So, watch what you like. Is worth mentioning again that Clinton in 2016 became the second Democrat in 16 years to win the popular vote and lose in the Electoral College. It was the largest popular vote margin in absolute terms, but not in terms of percentage, which happened in 1876, as you can see there. But it is worth mentioning that I think 7 out of the last 8 presidential elections, the popular vote has been won by a Democrat. And that's something addressed in the second link here, the National Public Radio link, as And so a warning from Republicans to Republicans to consider the Electoral College as pretty much the only way that Republicans can win the White House in the near future. But anyway, powers of the presidency also mapped out in Article 2 here. There are three different types. I'll go into detail on all three in subsequent slides, so I'm not going to dwell on these, but you have expressed powers, delegated powers, and inherent powers. And the adjectives used to describe the powers pretty much describe what we mean here. So without hashing this out now, we'll just dive right into what expressed powers are. Well, Article 2 gives the president the title of commander-in-chief. So the president is ipso facto a military leader, right? Presidents have effectively used this title as the power to make war. There are restrictions on this. We know that Congress has the authority to declare war, but presidents have used the expressed power as commander-in-chief to initiate military endeavors, say, without congressional approval. Judicial powers, presidents may grant pardons and amnesties. This link is to a John Oliver clip last week tonight on pardons and how presidents, particularly Trump, used them early in his presidency. It is pretty funny. Give that a watch if you like. But that is in effect a judicial power, right? The power to overturn a court decision that the president has is a judicial expressed power. President also has diplomatic powers. As the chief diplomat, presidents negotiate treaties. Presidents receive foreign ambassadors and dignitaries as the chief diplomatic representative of the country. This chief diplomat thing goes to a Saturday Night Live clip, I believe, which was done early in the Trump presidency and is also pretty funny, especially if you're not a fan of Trump. But anyway, I don't mean to be super partisan with these, but comedy kind of lends itself to one political ideology over another. President's commander-in-chief, there are photos of pretty much every president since the invention of the camera addressing troops, dealings with other states. Here you have President Trump and Melania Trump, the First Lady, with Emmanuel Macron and his wife, whose name escapes me, of France. Here you have a few different photos, Obama, Trump, and Trump, President and diplomacy. President Obama, after the midterm elections during his second term, decided to really thaw relations with Cuba. Republicans did not like this at all. But we knew that was coming, which is why the Obama administration waited until after the midterm elections of his second term to do that. Republicans were really happy about thawing of relations with North Korea, with Trump and Kim Jong-un there down below, which kind of surprised me because, North Korea is arguably more communist and totalitarian than Cuba. But so it goes. And then the collection of pictures there on the right-hand side was from I think a 2017, might have been 2018 NATO summit. So the North Atlantic Treaty Organization meetings, mostly countries of Europe, the United States, and Canada. It's a defense treaty founded after World War II. But here was Trump grabbing the prime minister, I believe, of Montenegro by the arm and shoving him out of the way so Trump could be in front for the photo shoot. But fun times as commander-in-chief is what I'm saying there. There's another link here, and I forget what that goes to. That might be the Saturday Night Live clip that I thought of earlier. More expressed powers. The president shall take care that the laws be fully executed or faithfully executed. And to that end, presidents may nominate executive and judicial officials, right? So I believe we've talked about that before in the last batch of slides because Congress has to approve these nominations. Legislative powers of the president are express powers as well. The president gives information to Congress and recommends measures. The vice president, also representing the executive branch, of course, is the president of the Senate and holds the tie-breaking vote when necessary. In the early years of the Biden administration, with a 50-50 split between Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, Vice President Harris has been called in to make a couple of tie-breaking votes. But that is a legislative power of the executive, not of the president per se, but of the executive branch. The veto would be an example of a legislative power that is an express power of the president. The veto is used by presidents more often under divided government. but you still see vetoes happening with unified government as well. And you can see evidence of this. I know this is a lot of detail in one slide. I don't like to post these, but in case you don't have easy access to the book, here you go. If you have the 16th edition of the book, this is on pages 176 and 177. But you can see even under times of unified government in blue here, during the New Deal years of the 30s and into the 40s, the FDR administration, you had Roosevelt's own Democrat-controlled Congress getting things vetoed by the president, right? So it happens. You can maybe see more of it here under divided government, but the filibuster has put an effective end to so much vetoing, and presidents make it clear when they're going to veto. Presidents know when they might be overridden. So there are a lot of politics that explain why vetoes aren't used as much as they used to be. Let's think about delegated powers here. So what do we mean by delegate? You don't hopefully know what to delegate means. Congress delegates power to the executive in effect by creating agencies by law, and then these agencies under the executive use their discretion in how they carry out their function. So Congress can create something like the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, which was created under Richard Nixon, a Republican, in 1972. But then once Congress votes to create such an agency, the executive takes over running it, right? Because the executive has to faithfully execute the laws, right? The president is sometimes given authority directly and sometimes given authority indirectly through the power to appoint agency officials. So there's yet more control on the part of the executive over institutions created by Congress, right? Congress has also delegated the use of force. This has come up in class already, so I won't dwell on it. But the last time Congress actually declared war was World War II. Ever since, what Congress does is it authorizes the president to use force. Inherent powers. So these aren't delegated, they aren't expressed, but these are powers inherent to the office of the presidency. The president has the inherent power to bring a legislative agenda before Congress. It's up to Congress to pass the laws, right? But whether it's the Affordable Care Act under Obama, the tax reform bill under Trump, COVID relief package under Biden, all of these things are the infrastructure package proposed early on in the Biden administration. Infrastructure was talked about constantly under Trump, but nothing was ever proposed. But a president can do that. Say, hey, here's my idea for a law, vote on this, right? The president also has the power to issue executive orders, which will come up later in the chapter as well, or signing statements, well, sorry. But this is a great link here. This goes to a Saturday Night Live clip that is a riff on the I'm Just a Bill up on Capitol Hill, but talking about executive orders. And it's quite funny. It's really, really worth your time. And it's not that long. If you like the I'm Just a Bill, you'll love this one. But think of the power to rescind orders of previous presidents, right? So when Trump took office after Obama, Trump signed a stack of executive orders overturning executive orders signed by Trump. And then Biden did the same thing after he took office and Trump left. It's a back and forth that happens every time the White House changes hands. Lastly, the other inherent power I wanted to mention is the president can, of course, fire cabinet members, right? They serve at the pleasure of the president. To become a cabinet member, you have to be nominated and then voted upon, approved, by Congress or by the Senate, but it doesn't mean that presidents can't undo that. Let's look historically here, shifting gears, the evolution of the presidency. I'm not going to dwell on this for any longer than I have to. But presidential power has varied over time and among particular occupants of the White House. Most of U.S. history can be described as the legislative epoch or era when Congress dominated federal policymaking, which I really think is what the founders wanted. Again, Congress is set out in the first article of the Constitution. It's the longest article of the Constitution. I think the founders really wanted Congress to take the reins of policymaking, which was the case until 1933, but things changed, right? The New Deal brought about by the Great Depression really paved the way for Franklin Roosevelt to carve out a much bigger role for presidents in policy making. So FDR's New Deal introduced new interventions in economic life and regulation by the federal government that necessarily meant a larger role for the chief executive. This is also the birth of liberalism in the United States, and I'll explain that in the next couple of slides, what I mean by this. But in practice, this meant a larger role for the president. And this has only expanded since the New Deal. Again, I hate to repeat myself, but every president really, especially since FDR, has sought out to create or provide for a bigger role for the president. And that's carried on by subsequent presidents, even of different parties. Brief aside on liberalism, bear with me for a couple of minutes here. But what we mean by liberal in the United States has evolved over time, came out of nowhere under FDR, and is different from how it's used in other English-speaking places. In the U.S. today, we take a liberal to mean someone who supports government intervention and public policies that increase equality of outcomes. And this is generally associated with the Democratic Party. My Fox News watching uncle, who hates Democrats, but his heart's generally in the right place, he'll uses the term liberal as an insult. That liberal Hillary Clinton. But this is different. FDR and the New Deal. This was all going on at a time after we're only talking about 15 years or so, 16 after the Bolshevik Revolution in the Soviet Union, Russia, which became the Soviet Union, which was socialist. And Roosevelt's political opponents labeled Roosevelt's policies as socialist, which was very negative at the time and really still is today. So Roosevelt decided to call his policies liberal, contrasting them with the conservative policies of mainly the Republican Party, right? So the term liberal, the way it's used today, came about only 90 some years ago, right? What FDR was calling conservatism associated with the Republicans was mostly what we call classical liberalism of like the Adam Smith types. And what he was proposing as liberalism was a very modest form of what we call or could call today democratic socialism. It's called democratic socialism everywhere else, like public schools and things like that. But again, socialism in this country has a bad connotation. FDR's meaning of liberals versus conservative was adopted in the US, but not in most other countries. So liberals in the UK are in the Conservative Party. The Liberal Party in Australia is conservative. And most conservatives in the US today are what those in political theory, political science more broadly would call neoliberals, right? It's just a new form of laissez-faire capitalism. So anyway, now that that's done, I'm about halfway through. Sorry to keep you waiting, but that's useful information that would help you understand what's going on in contemporary politics. Moving on here, formal power resources of the president. Obviously, the vice president is an important person, sometimes window dressing, sometimes influential, sometimes more influential after serving in office. This link will take you to a very, very silly and very old clip from the Jimmy Kimmel Live show of someone acting as Al Gore singing "It's Getting Hot in Here," the Nelly song from When You Were a Child. But it's hilarious. And goes to show you that after leaving office, 8 years as vice president, Al Gore's made more of a name for himself researching and talking about climate change than he ever did as vice president. But sometimes, because Gore was more window dressing, I think, to try to hang on to the South on the part of Clinton when he was nominated in 1992. Dick Cheney was a pretty influential vice president, and you can watch that in the Vice film. Cabinet members are obviously important. They're the key to the delegated powers that we talked about earlier. Cabinet secretaries are the chief administrators of the departments of government that they oversee, and they report to the president. The executive office of the president we'll talk more about next time around, but these are permanent agencies that help the president manage the executive branch. White House staff work more closely with the president or for the president. Presidents have analysts and advisors of their choosing. This hyperlink will take you to a silly Saturday Night Live skit I believe Jimmy Fallon makes a guest appearance as Jared Kushner, former President Trump's son-in-law and advisor, and it's a riff on The Bachelor. But anyway, enjoy. Here you have photos of recent vice presidents going back to Al Gore. Again, Al Gore was selected by Bill Clinton to help the Democrats try to hang on to the South. Dick Cheney was selected by George W. Bush for his insider knowledge in Washington, and Cheney had also been a member of the House, and he had also been Secretary of Defense under George H.W. Bush. Joe Biden was picked by Obama because Obama was really young, and Biden was really old even in 2008, and had lots of experience in the Senate and lots of experience with foreign affairs, which Obama lacked. Mike Pence was chosen by Donald Trump, I think, because of Trump's strong evangelical ties and Pence's experience as governor of Indiana and senator from Indiana. So he had a lot of insider knowledge on how to govern, and he provided some window dressing, as Trump is not the most Christian of former presidents that we've had, and Pence really is. Kamala Harris, I believe, was chosen by Biden because she had been the Attorney General of California, senator from California. She's obviously much younger. She's obviously not white. Her father was from Jamaica, I believe, and her mother was from India. So she brings a lot of experiential knowledge to the table, both as a politician and just as a human, which Biden needed. But anyway, there's always a reason why vice presidents are chosen as they are. This straight out of the textbook, the 16th edition. Again, we're going to talk about the executive branch institutionally more so in the next batch of slides. So I won't really say anything here beyond the fact that there are a lot of other institutions, sub-institutions, we'll say, underneath the president, right? And it's not that it's underneath, it's hierarchical. It's maybe best to view the president as the center, overseeing things that surround him. And I say him because they've all been men. Here's the same concept from the Katznelson book, but again, you see the president in the center and other agencies of varying closeness to the president. I think that's a better way to visualize this. But again, we're going to talk more about this in the next batch of slides. Loaded question here. Which of the following presidents was the most effective or influential or notorious? When I'm face-to-face in class, we can usually spend way more time than I would like to on this, but there are really cases you could make, surprisingly, as to the effectiveness of just about any of these, of the influence of about any of these, and the notoriousness of any of these to varying degrees, right? Bill Clinton was impeached over lying about a sexual encounter in the White House. Makes him pretty notorious, but Trump was impeached twice, right? Or you might say impeachment's just a partisan joke, which is a point I kind of made in the last batch of slides. So then ignore that, John Kennedy wasn't in office for very long. Was he effective? Arguably. Was he influential? I think so. A lot of what Johnson did wouldn't have been done without what Kennedy laid the ground for. So, anyway, George W. Bush, not a lot of people liked him. Again, won a very contentious and controversial election in the year 2000. But, he was on call when 9/11 happened. And while maybe how the aftermath was handled, we could disagree with that, and historians have been pretty critical since. At that time, he was the most influential person on the face of the earth. So, you can pick and choose. Jimmy Carter, one-term president, left pretty much, maybe not in shame, but has been a very influential president after leaving the White House. So it's hard to say. There's no right answer to these three questions, none at all. And I'm trying to leave my partisan politics aside here. You can really make the case any which way, right? But it's a good exercise for your brain. Anyway, contemporary basis of presidential power. Obviously, parties are increasingly important. Parties are not discussed at all in the Constitution, but they've become very important. Presidents cannot be difficult to be. No president has become president without having an association with a party, right? So partisans do help. Presidents, however, cannot control their party. We view the president as the leader of whatever party they belong to, but that doesn't mean that the party will do everything the president wants, although we could make a case that we're seeing more of this in the post-Trump presidency, with Trump really seemingly still maintaining control over the Republican Party. In 2009, 2010, Obama had a large Democratic majorities in both chambers of Congress. And then after the midterms of his first term in 2010, he then had to negotiate with the Republicans. And this gets back to unified versus divided government, which we've talked about already. The Trump administration worked, however, not that well with GOP minorities until the 2018 midterms, in which the Trump administration lost the House. And then incoming Biden in January of 2021 had the slimmest of majorities in the Senate. Again, ties are broken in the Senate by the vice president, so the Democrats have control. And most presidents come into office enjoying unified government. Most presidents lose one of the houses oftentimes, or they almost always lose seats in both houses, often losing one of the houses in their first midterm. So we'll see what the future holds. Presidential success on congressional votes here. The red line gives you the percentage of congressional votes in which the president took the position supported by Congress. This is when they agree. And the yellow underneath is period of divided government. So you can thus see votes tend to go through. The president and Congress tend to be on the same page most often when they're under control of the same party, right? This is on page 186 of the 16th edition if you're scoring from home. Going public, this is a contemporary base of presidential power. This is a tactic by which presidents seek to force members of Congress to support their policies by appealing directly to and mobilizing the public, right? So presidents pop out on television, say, here's the problem, here's my proposed solution, Congress, get to work, right? This tended to be more of a thing, if you will, throughout the 20th century with radio and television. Now, this is done often through the internet, but it's spilled over onto social media, which a lot of political scientists have argued that is only just going to exacerbate the problem of really entrenched polarization. Most of us already have an opinion, regardless of who the president has been in recent years. I like Trump, so whatever Trump says, I'm going to be in favor of. So I don't even need to listen to what he has to say. Now I don't like Biden, so it doesn't really matter what he has to say, whether it's on TV or on a website. I don't care because I don't like the guy, right? So it used to be that when the president came on, all of the 3 or 4 TV channels you had, and you couldn't watch your baseball game, you had to listen to the president. And I think The Office was more revered. But there have been moments. I mean, this is September 11th, 2001. Again, where George Bush was singularly the most influential human being on the planet. I mean, it's safe to say that person is often the U.S. president. But I was in college. I was probably about your age when September 11th happened. Although I wasn't a real fan of George W. Bush, you really had no choice but to look to him for some guidance and leadership. This was taken, I think, from a pretty key State of the Union address, or not State of the Union, but this was September 20th, I think, of 2001. Pretty important speech in which he basically announced that the U.S. would be invading Afghanistan. Presidents go on TV. Less important are the presidential chats from the Oval Office. Arguably more so are when presidents just appear on regular television. Makes them seem more presentable, approachable. I don't know. And then there have been presidents that actually had their own TV shows. I'm almost surprised. There was talk, conjecture, if you will, that after President Trump left office, that there might be a new President Trump news channel or something, which is yet to happen. But anyway, There it is. It's not really much more to say. Public appearance, that's kind of in there for a silly joke, but there it is. A public appearances by presidents. As you can imagine, this has gone up over time. I mean, for obvious reasons just traveling is easier. I mean, I couldn't imagine Herbert Hoover taking Air Force One. I don't know if there was an Air Force One when Herbert Hoover was president, but the dude didn't zip around the country like presidents do today. Right. And even Trump in 4 years went around damn near as much as George W. Bush and Obama did in 8 years. So that's probably just, again, a consequence of modern day travel, right? This is just, despite the technology, despite how easy it is to communicate between two different places, being there is still important enough, right? Personal president and approval ratings. This is another interesting piece of data here, and I've gone in and put in all of the images and figures and such from the 16th edition, which I know many of you probably aren't using, but the same data makes it through the Obama administration. The new edition here gets you through the Trump administration, but you can see generally presidents enter office riding a bit of a wave of popularity, and they inevitably lose popularity over time. And you can see that this was the case with pretty much every president, save maybe Trump, who seemed to be about as popular when he went in as when he left, but his approval rating never cracked 50%. That did happen for most presidents, at least when in their early years. And you can see George W. Bush, again, this is around the time of September 11th, obviously, a real spike in approval rating. It was over 90% approved of George W. Bush. You can see Ford came in after Watergate, after Nixon resigned and left the office in shame. Ford instantly came in with a pretty high approval rating, and then he pardoned Nixon, and I think lost a lot of support, especially from independents and Democrats. But anyway, how about the administrative state and the president, right? As the limits of going public have become more apparent in the modern day 21st century age, contemporary presidents have turned more and more to their executive powers to satisfy policy goals. So they've increased the size and importance of the executive office of the president. They've increased the use of regulatory review. They've increased the directives to agencies. So these delegated powers by Congress to the executive can just become like snowballs in which presidents use agencies to accumulate more and more power. Signing statements, executive orders, and executive agreements are three tools that presidents use to show the power, exercise the power. We've already talked about executive orders. Signing statements are when a law is passed by Congress, and all presidents do this, will sign the bill into law, but add to that a note basically saying, here's how I'm going to enforce this law. Here's how I interpret it. And it's often contrary in practice to what Congress likely wanted. And the use of them has gone up and up over time. Or executive orders, which we talked about earlier. The last thing was executive agreements that I mentioned here. Executive agreements function exactly like treaties. The Supreme Court has declared them to function exactly like treaties, but the difference between a treaty and an executive agreement is whether or not the president wants to submit it to the Senate for ratification. If it's ratified by the Senate, it's a treaty. If it's not, it's an executive agreement, which is to say that, yes, presidents can basically make agreements with foreign countries without any congressional oversight, and they have the power of law because treaties have the power of law. So there you go. Again, more expansion of presidential power. Discussion question. Is the rise of presidential power good for democracy, right? Again, this is one of these things that were we in class face-to-face, we would talk about this for probably much longer than I would have planned on, but it probably would have been a pretty useful discussion. There's no correct answer. I mean, obviously you can say yes, because the president is more directly accountable because it's a unitary institution and it's highly visible. You could say no, because obviously any one president, no matter who he or someday she, someday they, who might be, cannot possibly represent the views of 330 million Americans, right? And in a presidential system, we only get two bites at the apple to really pass judgment on a president. And that's, the first time the president runs if he's elected, and then it's time for re-election. That's it, right? Other systems with prime ministers and such, you can vote out a prime minister with an act of parliament. Can't do that, right? Presidents can be impeached, but we've seen during the Trump years that is way easier said than done, right? But keep this question in mind when you watch the film Vice. A lot of people have told me over the semesters they like the Vice film. A couple people have inevitably seen it before when it came out. It's not that old of a movie, but I've been told that they appreciate it a lot more knowing a bit more about how U.S. politics works when watching the film, and that's why I have you watch the films. Okay, so I'm wrapping up now, so I've gone a little longer than I wanted to, but we're nearing the end. Let's talk briefly about the plural executive in California. This concept was rejected by the U.S. founders. It was regarded as inefficient, competitive, and fractious. Founders opted instead for a single executive in the form of the president after the failure of the Articles of Confederation, which really didn't have a president, right? When we've covered this, so I don't really need to say more, but we know that in California, the governor is in effect the head of the executive branch, but the executive branch by design in California is made up of lots of people, right? This plural model was adopted with the revised California State Constitution of 1879. There are 12 people in 9 offices who share power, right? Hopefully you learned this in high school if you went to high school in California. I'm not going to ask you to write the list, so you don't need to memorize this. All I want you to know is that indeed there's more than one person in the executive, right? So the governor is the first among equals, and then you've got these different positions, right? Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, Secretary of State. These are pretty standard offices in most every other state as well. The unique component here is the Board of Equalization, which is made up of 4 people who basically oversee tax policy in the state, right? So the duty of each of these people or offices on the last slide is to carry into effect state laws, policies, and programs. Everyone's elected to a 4-year term, and we've already talked about term limits as a consequence of the 1990 proposition. You can serve 2 terms or 8 years total in any one position. After that, there's a lifetime ban in that particular office in which you can never serve again. However, this has incentivized folks to run for other offices, and political scientists have called this musical chairs, right? So executives run for other positions. This guy, John Chang, has been on the Board of Equalization. He's been controller. He's been treasurer. Jerry Brown was Secretary of State for a long time, then governor. And I think I have my dates wrong here. He couldn't have been from 1971 to 1995, Secretary of State. So I'm sorry about that. But then there's the governor, 79 to 83, and 2011 to 2019. And he was able to do that as governor because of the year that the proposition was passed. It was passed in 1990, after which Jerry Brown had been governor once before, so he was allowed to run for governor again. He was kind of grandfathered into that system. But after his second term, or his 4th term, but his second term, the second time around in 2019, he could not run for re-election. And that's how you got Gavin Newsom, who in 2021 has been on the hot seat. Surprisingly, these folks do not meet as a group, which I find odd. But anyway, that's the way it goes. So anyway, that's my last slide. That's it for the presidency and the plural executive. Be in touch. I'm a bit behind on grading as usual, but I'll try to get caught up soon. But yeah, be in touch as needed. I'm here to help. Take care.